I'll never forget it. I was just doing my political internship in Tallahassee, and I walked in a room full of all these politicians and lobbyists, and I was kind of horrified at how they looked. A lot of overweight people, a lot of obesity, a lot of hunchbacks, crooked necks, and a lot of elderly. Now, I'm not saying these things to deride these people, but it really scared me as, hey, is that my future? Do I have to look like that just by being in the political industry? Do I have to give all of my time away to where I can't maintain my physical health? But over time, my philosophy on lifting has changed. So originally, it was just to be strong and look good. And over the years, I've taken more of an aesthetics approach. And now I actually care more about how I look than my actual quality of strength, although there's always a balance to be had there. But my goal is to convince you as to why you should be physically fit. There's a variety of reasons, and a lot of them are pretty boring. And if you're not convinced already, then you probably won't be convinced by the normal ones of you feel good, you're going to look better, overall your morbidity is going to be down, you're going to be able to run and jump when you're older. But in reality, one of the main reasons I think lifting and taking your physical fitness seriously is, especially in today's society, is becoming a luxury good. And looking good and being physically fit is becoming a luxury good because one, our food is terrible. And then two, a lot of people don't have time to dedicate to looking good, which is terrible to say. And of course, I'm trying to be as generic as possible. We all know there's a scale and what different people find attractive and stuff like that. But I think it's fair to say that people who are actively fit and healthy are normally going to glow and look better than people who don't. I think it shouldn't be controversial to say someone who eats McDonald's, once again, an overused example, is going to look worse and feel worse and be worse than someone who eats good food like a heavy meat, heavy veggie diet. So, what should you be doing about this? Well, you should have the realization that if you want to perform optimally in your business life, in your relationships, you need to have some kind of established presence. And having an established presence helps when you're at your physically most fit. I know this sounds really, really shallow, but it's true. One of my main goals in life is to face reality for what it's worth and try to force myself to adapt the best that I can. And so when I was in that room in Tallahassee, I realized, okay, so here are people who are making a lot of money and don't necessarily need to be physically fit to do so. However, you can kind of look, and the basic human has kind of an ill feeling toward people who you can kind of tell have not maintained any physical form or shape over their life. And at least that's how I felt. And it is kind of horrifying to think that you almost have to choose. There's this idea that if you're going to work hard and make money and be a part of the system, that you can't be physically fit. And what happens with a lot of people, especially in their 20s, is they end up sacrificing years off of their life in order to achieve a certain type of lifestyle when at the end of the day, now they're so unhealthy that they can't even enjoy the lifestyle that they want to live. So being healthy and aesthetics is incredibly important in the social political life, not only because you want to look good and people will respect you for it, but I talk to a lot of people about, especially power lifters, about being big and having presence in a room. And if you're like a tall or lanky guy or girl, there's something to be said about taking up space. And it sounds kind of weird, but it's kind of like with the difference between being tall and being short. Of course, you can't affect how you were born, right? But there's something psychological about when you have to look up at somebody when you're talking to them, whether you realize it or not. There's been a lot of studies about how most CEOs are 6 foot and above or 6'2" and above. There's a lot of psychological factors behind that. So there's also psychological factors about when you're entering a room and you want to take up presence in the room because it almost kind of commands some sort of respect, people who are bigger than you. And technically that kind of goes for not necessarily being muscular, but just being bigger in general. Of course, everything has its limits and you still want to look good, even if you're big, right? But you can use these small little cues to your advantage, because stuff like this does matter, especially in the political world. What's funny is one of my favorite statements is someone said, DC is Hollywood for ugly people, right? And it's because Hollywood is so superficial and obsessed with looking at their appearance, whereas in DC, all they're obsessed with is power. And of course, there's some intertwining between the two. Beauty can help you become powerful, and power can help you become beautiful, but they are definitely not necessarily the same thing. But let's talk on some more philosophical notes. I definitely think the aesthetic lifestyle and trying to be the most beautiful person that you can be is something that we should all aspire and achieve, aspire to be and try to achieve. So if you look at our current elites, it's interesting. We've seen a little bit of a shift, but let's just use Sam Bankman-Fried. Kid was lazy. Kid always wore a hoodie, wasn't dressed up ever, did not do any kind of self-care, and was overall just a stupid, goofy looking kid. And a lot of our tech elites actually look like that. They purposefully are trying to relate, I guess, to the average person, look like they might as well be homeless. And some people might say, oh, that's cool because we don't need to dress nice now. But I actually think it's a terrible thing, because there's something to be said about wanting the people who rule over you, or the elites in your society, to be something to aspire toward. And I don't want to aspire to be some overweight kid wearing a hoodie, right? Who's now hopefully going to be in prison for quite some time, right? No, I want to aspire to be someone who looks badass. I want to aspire to be someone who looks great, looks cool, does cool stuff. And it's funny because that's, for a lot of young men, actually the appeal to people like Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan Tate. Even if you don't like their political views, or you don't like a lot of what they say, you have to understand that there's very basic human nature appeals to what makes these types of people attractive. One, they themselves are attractive people, but two, they have the presence of looking cool with a cigar, being some badass who's talking about fighting the system or the matrix, which is, in every movie every kid sees growing up. And then, of course, there's the wealth aspect, the nice car aspect. And of course, all those are superficial things. But when you have something to look up to and something to inspire you, even if it's something that's shallow, things like that are important to society, and they can actually drive a lot of people to do a lot of good. Of course, remember, I'm talking on the margins. I'm not then going to talk about, a society that's incredibly superficial and only chasing superficial things. But there is nothing superficial, I don't think, about trying to chase an aesthetic lifestyle, because beauty is important, and beauty is something that I think is kind of a lost art and concept here in the United States. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with economic efficiency. You can look at the 1950s and 60s and see the absolute beauty in cars. Gas was cheap, so efficiency in miles per hour or miles per gallon didn't matter at all. You could have any type of car, make it as heavy as you want, add a V8 engine, really go all the way and just focusing on making it aesthetic and beautiful, and worrying about the gas price later. Cars in the 1950s and 60s were not efficient, but they were incredibly beautiful. And if you look at some of the art from those periods, look at some of the old magazines that were trying to sell old Cadillacs. Man, the magazines in and of themselves are pieces of art. Now, what do we have? We have really efficient vehicles that all look the same. You could argue that a Tesla maybe looks kind of nice, and certainly the inside of Tesla is very minimalistic, and I think that can be aesthetic. But now every car pretty much looks the exact same. It really does. It has the same shape, same form, because when you're looking at efficiency, efficiency really only has one shape or form. There's only one most efficient version of an airplane. There's only one most efficient version of a car. There's only one efficient version of a ship. And everyone wants that most efficient version. And that's what capitalism wants. And that's what people who care about the bottom line want. We want efficiency. It is really efficient to have your church in a random building that looks like it was some industrial site, because it's cheap, it's big, it's wide. And so that's efficiency. It's not efficient to build a giant cathedral, a giant Gothic cathedral that will take generations simply for it to be a beautiful representation of God, right? That's not efficient. I don't know how much GDP a Gothic cathedral dedicated to, the European economies at the time. But certainly beauty is not necessarily efficient in any way, shape, or form, which is interesting. And it's just one of the few things, or one of the many things actually, that anarchists, libertarians, and communists have in common is a lot of them do not focus on beauty at all. They only care about either class or efficiency. So, drawing this all the way back to the gym, when you start to focus on things like your health and trying to be a beautiful person, both in spirit and mind and body, you actually start to develop a quasi different political philosophy than I think a lot of what's in the mainstream. And you start to notice that what comes from within these ideals of beauty and aesthetics starts to affect everything that you want in life. It might affect how you feel about the environment. It might affect how you feel about preserving historical buildings. It might appear in different ways, such as how we should build new buildings. Maybe I don't necessarily care about saving money here and there if it means we get to build something more beautiful from the government perspective. Is the only reason we don't build great monuments and great statues anymore is because we're too worried about budget deficits? Are we so far in the hole in the budget deficit that we can't afford to make things beautiful anymore? And who decides what's beautiful? And that's a whole nother conversation. But you can't necessarily control what the government does and creates when it comes to beauty, but you can control yourself, and you can control the aspects of your life that you can make beautiful. And it starts, I think, with yourself and with your own body. And that doesn't have to be some Hollywood mold. It doesn't have to be what Zac Efron looks like. It doesn't have to be the perfect jawline, the perfect nose, but it can be the best version and best beautiful version of you. And that means getting in the gym. It means taking your health seriously. It means researching really what you eat and trying to up the quality of your life. Because at the end of the day, the more beautiful you yourself can be, the more beautiful you can make the world around you.